It was one of those evenings where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. The kind where you're sprawled on the couch, a half-empty bag of chips in your lap, watching your favorite show on autopilot. My tea was cooling gently on the coffee table. My blanket had reached peak coziness, and my brain was operating in vegetable mode. And then, I saw it. The trash bag. It sat in the corner of my kitchen, glaring at me with a silent judgment only inanimate objects seem capable of. Somehow, without eyes or mouth, it was still managing to radiate disdain. The smell wasn't overwhelming yet, but it was heading there. That dangerous stage where you either take action or you just burn the whole apartment down and start fresh. I sighed. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was like that one chore you put off until it becomes the only thing you can think about. I tossed the chips onto the coffee table, hit pause on the remote, and got up. No big deal, I told myself. 2 minutes tops. I slipped on my sneakers, the lazy, no-laces ones, because tying shoes would have been a ridiculous overcommitment for such a short errand. My hoodie? Nah, I wasn't going far enough to need it. This was a surgical strike. Down the stairs, trash in a bin, back on the couch. Mission duration, approximately the time it takes for a commercial break. Keys? In the pocket of the trash bag. Why? Because I was trying to be efficient. One trip, hands-free. Phone? In my pants pocket. Tea? Waiting patiently for my victorious return. I slung the trash bag over my shoulder like some depressing Santa Claus and headed out the door. The cool hallway air hit me, and I was already picturing the sweet satisfaction of returning to my show with my apartment, smelling marginally less like whatever was decomposing in that bag. I had no idea that this 2-minute mission was about to turn into a neighborhood-wide odyssey, one that would leave me damp, overburdened, and questioning every life choice that had led me here. The stairwell was quiet, echoing with the sound of my sneakers squeaking faintly against the concrete steps. I was halfway down to the ground floor when the ambush happened. Out of nowhere, Aunt Luda from the 3rd floor appeared, the kind of woman who can detect a neighbor in the hallway from 3 floors away and materialize instantly, armed with small talk and errands. She wore a puffy jacket the size of a small sofa and that particular smile which always meant, "You're about to get roped into something." "Oh, Ivan, where are you headed?" she called out like she was announcing my arrival on a game show. I held up the trash bag, just taking out the garbage. Her face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who just found a solution to their problem. "Perfect. You can grab 2 bottles of water from my car for me. After my massage, I can't lift them. My arms are useless." Now, I'm not heartless. I couldn't exactly say no without looking like a monster. So I nodded. Sure, no problem. I detoured to the parking lot, the trash bag swinging at my side like a weird, lumpy purse. Aunt Luda's car was parked right by the curb. I set the trash down beside her trunk, popped it open, and fished out the 2 massive bottles. They weren't just a small drink kind. No, these were industrial-grade water jugs that looked like they were stolen from an office cooler. Balancing them awkwardly, I turned to head back into the building, just in time to watch the front door close. And not just rest and closed. No, it made that click sound. The locked click. I froze. My mind went instantly to my keys. They weren't in my pants pocket. They weren't in my hoodie pocket. They were in the trash bag. The trash bag now sitting innocently by Aunt Luda's car. Except, it wasn't sitting there anymore. For a moment, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing, or rather, not seeing. The spot next to Aunt Luda's car was empty. No trash bag, no keys, no logical explanation. I set the water bottles down with the care of someone defusing a bomb, scanning the parking lot like a detective at a crime scene. There was no wind strong enough to blow away a bag that heavy, and we don't exactly have raccoons trained in grand theft garbage. Which left what? Someone took it? That thought alone made my stomach clench. Who will want my trash? My eyes darted left. Nothing but a cat sunbathing on a hood. Right, just an old, dented Lada and a man in a tracksuit, smoking like he was on break from a 1990s gangster movie. Then, beyond the lot, I spotted movement near the dumpsters. A hunched figure was poking around in the bins, a plastic bag hanging from his arm. My plastic bag. Heart pounding, I jogged toward him, the cold air biting at my neck. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Yes, it was definitely my garbage. The duct tape tear in the corner, the faint whiff of something that could either be old chicken or a failed science experiment. When I was just a few steps away, the man turned to me. He was wearing a battered cap and a windbreaker older than me. He held the bag up like a trophy. "This yours?" he asked, squinting. "Because there's a passport in here." I froze mid-step. My mouth opened, but all that came out was a startled, "What?" He shook the bag, and I heard the unmistakable clink of a zipper. That's when I remembered. I tossed out an old backpack earlier today, one I thought was empty. Except, apparently, it wasn't. Inside it, my documents. All of them. Passport, ID, even a couple of papers I've been meaning to file away tomorrow. A cold sweat hit me. If this stranger hadn't been rummaging through the bins, those papers would have been gone for good. I mumbled about 10 thank yous in a row, grabbed the bag, and clutched it like a sacred relic. My evening had officially gone from harmless trash run to unexpected identity theft prevention mission. And then my phone started ringing. The phone buzzed in my pocket like an impatient bee. I awkwardly shifted the trash bag under one arm and fished the phone out with my free hand, expecting it to be spam or maybe my mother. Instead, it was my neighbor Petro. "Ivan, you're outside, right?" he asked, his voice echoing oddly, like he was calling from a cave. Yeah. What? Perfect. My package just arrived in taxi. Can you grab it for me? I'm in the shower." I stared at the bag of garbage in my other hand, still reeling from the fact it had almost taken my passport to the great landfill in the sky. But apparently, the universe had decided I was tonight's community errand boy. "Fine," I muttered. "What does it look like?" "You'll see," Petro said quickly, and hung up before I could protest. The taxi was idling near the curb, hazard lights blinking. I walked over, juggling my phone and the trash bag. The driver leaned out the window, holding what I assumed would be a cardboard box or a padded envelope. It was neither. Instead, he presented me with a large, steaming glass jar of borscht. 3 liters, at least. "Careful," he warned gravely. "It's hot. My grandma made it." And just like that, my left hand was now cradling a jar of beet soup warm enough to qualify as a small space heater, while my right hand still clung to a garbage bag full of personal documents and questionable leftovers. The absurdity of it all began to settle in. 20 minutes ago, I'd been on my couch with chips. Now, I was standing in the drizzle, holding what looked like the least appetizing picnic for two in the history of mankind. Then I felt the first raindrop hit my cheek. It started innocently, a single cold droplet on my cheek, just enough to make me glance at the sky. The clouds above were heavy and swollen, the kind that hang there like overworked waiters carrying trays they're definitely going to spill. Within seconds, the drizzle began. The polite kind of rain that pretends it's harmless but secretly soaks into your clothes with surgical precision. My first thought was, okay, no big deal. I'm almost home. Except I wasn't. The jar of hot borscht was slowly branding my left palm, while the trash bag in my right hand was getting slicker by the second. I tried to shift the bag for a better grip, but it only made the plastic stretch ominously. Somewhere inside, the glass clinked against a metal zipper. My documents, still riding shotgun with whatever organic horrors I'd forgotten to throw out weeks ago. And then the real rain started. It was as if the sky decided, oh, you thought this was light drizzle? And turned the tap on full blast. The concrete gleamed under the streetlights. Puddles spread like oil stains, and the wind picked up just enough to turn my hair into something a crow might nest in. I trudged forward, blinking against the spray, clutching my absurd cargo like it was the crown jewels. People in proper coats and umbrellas passed me, giving that quick side-eye reserved for madmen and street performers. One guy even muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "What's his deal?" Halfway across the lot, my phone began buzzing again, not just ringing, but vibrating like it was trying to escape my pocket. I groaned aloud. The only thing worse than answering a call in the rain was ignoring it and having to explain later. I awkwardly tucked the jar of borscht against my chest, freeing my left hand just enough to fish the phone out. Water ran down my sleeve and dripped into my collar. My fingers slipped on the touchscreen as I swiped to answer. It was my mother. "Ivan, are you near the store?" My mother's voice came through the speaker, already laced with the expectation that the answer was yes. Technically, I wasn't that close, but close enough to doom myself. Sort of, I muttered, shifting the jar of borscht higher against my chest before it slipped. Perfect. Buy a loaf of bread for me. I'm having guests tomorrow. In the background, I could hear the clatter of pots and the faint, menacing whistle of a tea kettle. My mother didn't ask if I could. She knew. Mothers have that sixth sense that allows them to smell both guilt and proximity to grocery stores. I'm kind of in the middle of, I began, but she cut me off. Bread, Ivan. Rye if they have it. Bye-bye. Click. I stood there in the pouring rain, my phone dripping onto the pavement, holding a trash bag full of sensitive documents in one hand and a boiling glass jar of beet soup in the other. And now I was going shopping. The store's automatic doors hissed open, and I shuffled inside like some bizarre street vendor selling trash and borscht combo deals. The warmth of the air conditioning hit me, instantly fogging up the jar. I grabbed a loaf of rye, nearly dropping the bag when my fingers cramped from the cold, and headed for the self-checkout. The cashier on duty, a bored teenager with earbuds in, gave me a once-over that said, "Whatever's happening in your life, I don't want to know." Receipt in my pocket, bread under my arm, I stepped back into the downpour. The loaf was now another awkward addition to my growing tower of nonsense. If anyone was watching from their window, they were seeing a man slowly evolve into a mobile grocery tragedy sculpture. And I still hadn't made a home. By this point, I looked less like a man taking out the trash and more like a contestant in some post-apocalyptic survival challenge. My right hand gripped the slippery trash bag like it was my lifeline. My left arm cradled a scalding jar of borscht. The loaf of bread was wedged awkwardly between my elbow and ribs, and the two massive bottles of Aunt Luda's water still hung from my wrist like cruel, liquid shackles. The rain was relentless now, hammering against the glass jar with a hollow plink, plink, plink. My sneakers had transformed into portable aquariums, each step producing a satisfying but depressing squelch. I kept glancing at the apartment building ahead, but with every step it seemed to retreat further away, like some cruel urban mirage. My internal monologue had devolved into a series of primitive grunts and curses. The bread was slipping. The borscht jar was burning through my jacketless arm. The trash bag kept swinging and smacking into my knee like it was trying to sabotage me. And then, just as I reached the building's entrance, I realized I still had to unlock the door. This would have been fine if my keys weren't currently nestled somewhere inside the damp, grimy depths of the trash bag. I froze in front of the locked glass door, the rain cascading down my face, my breath fogging the view inside. Somewhere in my brain, a little voice whispered, "This is how it ends. This is where they'll find you." I bent awkwardly, trying to nudge the bag onto the wet concrete without dropping everything else. The borscht jar slid dangerously in my arm. One of the water bottles slipped off my wrist and thudded to the ground, splashing my already soaked jeans. I dug into the bag with my free hand, grimacing as my fingers brushed something cold, slimy, and suspiciously unidentifiable. Finally, my fingers closed around the metal shape of my keyring. I yanked it free like a treasure hunter pulling gold from the ocean floor. The worst part? This wasn't even the end of my night. The key slid into the lock with a reluctant click, and I shoved the door open with my shoulder, nearly dropping the bread in the process. Warm, slightly dusty hallway air wrapped around me like a blanket, though the feeling was less comforting hug and more cheap motel heating system. I trudged inside, leaving a trail of rainwater, muddy sneaker prints, and a faint smell of boiled beets in my wake. The building's elevator was out of service, naturally, so I began to climb up the stairs, each step feeling like a minor betrayal of my remaining energy reserves. Halfway up, Aunt Luda popped out of her apartment like a jack-in-the-box. "Oh, wonderful. You brought the water," she exclaimed, reaching for the bottles dangling from my wrist. "Yeah," I panted, "and a bunch of other stuff I never signed up for." She chuckled, completely ignoring the fact that I looked like I had just escaped from a culinary hostage situation. I finally made it to my floor, fumbled with my apartment key, and staggered inside. The door closed behind me with a satisfying thunk. Silence. Just me, my wet clothes, and my kitchen light buzzing faintly overhead. I set everything down on the counter, the bread, the steaming jar of borscht, the trash bag, the bottles of water, and just stood there for a moment, letting my arms slowly stop vibrating from the effort. Then I noticed the puddle forming under the trash bag, a small, grayish puddle with an odor that could strip paint. I sighed, grabbed the bag, and headed for the actual trash chute down the hall. When I came back, I glanced at my tea on the table. Cold. My show on the TV? 2 episodes ahead. My chips? Soggy from the humidity in the room. And me? I was a walking cautionary tale about why you should never, ever trust the words just 2 minutes. But the night still had one last, petty surprise for me. I was peeling off my soaked sneakers, each one making a slurp sound like it was reluctant to let me go, when my phone buzzed again. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. I was done being the neighborhood delivery mule. But curiosity and a deep-seated fear that it might be my mother again won out. It was a text from Petro. Hey, did you remember to give the borscht jar back to the taxi driver? It was just for delivery, not for me to keep. I stared at the message, my brain trying to reboot after short-circuiting. The borscht. The 3-liter, handcrafted by Grandma Borscht was not mine. I shuffled back into the kitchen and looked at it. The jar sitting proudly on my counter, steaming faintly like it had plans for my evening. I imagined the poor taxi driver, driving around the city with an empty seat where the jar was supposed to be, wondering if I was now somewhere in an alley drinking it straight from the container. Petro followed up with another message. She says not to shake it, and don't open it, and don't leave it out in the cold. I glanced toward the window, where rain hammered against the glass like it was auditioning for a horror movie. Too late for that last one. Dragging myself back into my wet sneakers felt like a cruel joke, but I wasn't about to risk being labeled the borscht thief of Building 14. I grabbed the jar, braced myself for another round of rain, and headed for the door. It occurred to me then, I had been just taking out the trash for nearly 50 minutes, and I still wasn't done. The rain had downgraded from biblical flood to miserable cold spit, which was only slightly less demoralizing. I clutched the borscht jar in both hands like it was a newborn, the glass still warm against my frozen fingers. My sneakers, now beyond redemption, made a sad squelch with each step toward the parking lot where the taxi was waiting. The driver spotted me and leaned out his window with a relieved grin. Oh, thank you. I thought you'd, eaten it. Tempting, I muttered, handing over the jar. He carefully placed it on the seat beside him, as if returning a priceless artifact to a museum. Grandma will be happy, he said. Then, after a pause, you look wet. That was the politest possible description of my state. By the time I climbed back up to my apartment, my body was operating on autopilot. I locked the door, peeled off my soaked socks, and collapsed onto the couch. My tea was cold, my chips were stale, my show had skipped 3 episodes ahead, and the trash bag that had started it all was now sitting where it should have been an hour ago, in the building's chute. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the evening. Almost lost my passport to the dumpster gods. Carried boiling soup like a lunatic in a rainstorm. Accidentally became the guardian of 2 gallons of water and a loaf of rye. Returned soup to its rightful owner as if I were in some Eastern European fairy tale. All because I just wanted to take out the trash. I took a deep breath, reached for the remote, and then my phone buzzed again. It was my mom. Ivan, did you remember to buy butter for tomorrow? I closed my eyes and whispered to no one. I'm never taking the trash out again. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the meal in front of me. It was the same as every night, perfectly cooked, arranged with almost obsessive care. But tonight, it didn't feel hungry. My hands trembled as I picked up the fork, not from fear, but from the heavy realization pressing on me. I had been avoiding the truth for too long. Every night, someone or something was cooking for me. Every morning, there was no trace of the intruder. But last night, I heard it. Soft footsteps, a chair scraping the floor, a whisper, like someone speaking through a mouth full of water. I had pretended not to notice. Pretended it was all fine. Not anymore. I stood up and walked to the corner of the room. The old floorboard there creaked. I pressed it down, and it popped open, revealing a small hatch. I don't remember ever putting it there. Inside was a note. It wasn't written in pen or pencil. The letters were uneven, smudged, as though carved into the paper with a nail. You've been a wonderful host. I'll be joining you for dinner tonight. I froze. My ears caught a faint sound from behind me, the soft scrape of a chair being pulled out. When I turned around, the chair across from mine wasn't empty anymore. It smiled at me.